There comes a moment in every person's life when the truth finally hits them. Harder than the breakup, harder than the silence, harder than the goodbye. It's the moment they look back and suddenly realize they misjudged you. They underestimated you. They mishandled you. They broke the heart that would have never betrayed them. And nothing destroys a person faster than the awareness that they lost someone who would have loved them in ways they may never feel again. Because they didn't just lose you, they lost the version of themselves they were becoming when they were with you. And now they're paying for it in ways they'll never admit out loud. Let's talk about that moment. The moment they finally understand. They broke the wrong heart. It never hits them when you're crying, not when you're begging, not when you're fighting for clarity or asking for the bare minimum. They refuse to give. It hits them much later, quietly, unexpectedly, in a moment they never see coming. Maybe it's a night when everything feels too silent. Maybe it's a song they thought they forgot. Maybe it's a memory that returns sharper than the day it was made. Or maybe it's the moment they meet someone new and realize they don't feel the way they felt with you. Because here's the truth. Nobody tells you when your heart is breaking. People don't regret losing you while they still think they can get you back. Regret comes only when reality does. And reality always arrives after you've healed, after you've grown, after the strength they never noticed is now the strength they can't reach. After the softness they took for granted is now the softness they can't access. After the effort you poured into them is now poured into you. It hits them when it's too late to undo anything. And that's why the regret cuts so deep for them. Not because you're gone, but because you're not waiting. They remember your patience. First, the way you forgave what you shouldn't have forgiven, the way you stayed when you should have walked away, the way you explained yourself again and again and again, hoping they'd finally see you, the way you saw them. And back then, they thought it meant you'd never leave. They mistook your loyalty for permanence. They thought your heart was something they could break and still keep. They thought your love was something they could mistreat and never lose. But now that you're no longer accessible, no longer reaching out, no longer carrying the connection on your back, now they understand what your presence actually meant. Because losing someone like you isn't a clean cut. It's a slow ache, a delayed burn, a regret that grows instead of fades. And it grows because of the person you became after them, not the broken version, not the hurting version, not the version that waited for closure. That never came, but the healed version, the confident version, the version that finally sees your worth, a version they don't get access to anymore. It hits them when they realize that nobody else understands them the way you did. Not because others aren't good people, but because connection is not something you can replace by choice. It's something the heart picks, rarely and often without warning. And your heart picked them in a way that still confuses them. You saw their potential when others saw their patterns. You saw their pain when others saw their pride. You saw the scared parts behind their distance, their coldness, their inconsistency, and you loved them anyway. You didn't love them for what they gave. You loved them for who they tried to hide. And now they understand how rare that was, because with everyone else, they have to explain themselves. With you, they never had to explain anything. You just understood. They didn't appreciate it then. But life has a way of revealing the truth. Through contrast, it hits them when they see you smiling. Without them, the kind of smile that isn't forced, or performed, or posted to make a point. A real one, a peaceful one, a smile that says, I didn't just survive you, I outgrew you. And that's when the guilt hits them hardest. Not because they hurt you. They told themselves you'd get over it. It's because you became someone stronger. Because of their absence, not because of their love. They were supposed to be a soft place to land. Instead, they became the wound you healed yourself from. And that's the part that breaks them. Because you didn't become colder. You became wiser. You didn't become bitter. You became selective. You didn't stop loving. You just stopped loving blindly. And now, when they look at you, they don't see the version they took for granted. They see the version they'll never get again. It hits them when they finally realize this truth. You weren't the problem. You were the lesson. The lesson in loyalty. The lesson in effort. The lesson in emotional safety. The lesson in consistency. The lesson in what real love looks like when it's given wholeheartedly, without games, or ego, or fear. And no matter who they meet next, no matter how many distractions they chase, no matter how loud their pride is, your energy is now the standard. Every other connection is measured against, not because you were perfect, but because you were genuine, present, real, emotionally available. In a world full of half-hearted people, they didn't just lose you, they lost the version of themselves that felt seen by you. And that is a kind of loss that echoes. It hits them when their own heart finally catches up to everything their ego denied. And that moment, the moment their ego falls silent for the first time, is the moment they finally whisper to themselves, I broke the wrong heart, not because you were weak, but because you were the one person who loved them from a place they couldn't find anywhere else. And now they understand the truth they ran from. You were never replaceable. They just never expected to run out of time. There's a strange thing that happens to people when they lose someone they thought would always be there. At first, they feel relieved, free, untouched, unaffected. They tell themselves they made the right choice. They tell their friends they're fine. They convince their ego that you'll miss them far more than they'll ever miss you. But time has a way of peeling the layers back, and eventually, the same person who acted indifferent starts to feel something they never expected, the weight of what they lost. Not the attention, not the comfort, not the routine, but the soul behind it. Because losing someone like you isn't felt instantly. It's felt gradually, like a slow leak that eventually empties out every place you once filled. And before they even realize it, they're sitting alone, trying to figure out how someone who wasn't that important now feels irreplaceable. It starts small, a thought, a memory, a moment that shouldn't matter, but somehow does. Maybe it's the way you used to listen without rushing them, the way you noticed the tiny details they never mentioned out loud, the way you sensed their mood before they opened their mouth. Nobody else does that. Nobody else even tries. Because you didn't connect with their persona. You connected with their hidden self. And that's the version of them they can't share with anyone anymore. So it sits inside them, unspoken, unmatched, unreplaced. That's when the confusion starts, the regret, the internal arguments. They pretend they're not having. They thought they ended things with someone they could forget. They didn't realize they ended things with someone their soul wasn't ready to lose. Then life steps in. Life always steps in. It presents them with new people, people who are fine, nice, interesting, worth knowing. But something is missing. something they don't recognize at first, something they don't know how to name. Until one day, it hits them. The missing piece was the part of themselves they only ever shared with you. The softness, the vulnerability, the unguarded moments, the inner world they kept locked away from everyone else. They can talk to others, laugh with others, flirt with others, but they don't open up. They can't, because you were the anomaly, the exception, the rare person they let beyond the walls they built long before you. And that doesn't happen twice. Not for them. Not with the way they're wired. Not with the way they protect themselves from anything that feels too real. So now, they're stuck trying to connect, while their heart refuses to let anyone in the way it let you, stuck chasing distractions that never silenced the echo you left behind. And then, there comes the moment they can't escape, the moment they realize you're not waiting for them. That's when the panic hits. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind they show others, the quiet kind, the internal kind, the kind that feels like losing oxygen in a room filled with air, because they thought you'd be there if they ever wanted to come back. They always assumed you'd answer, you'd listen, you'd forgive, you'd fold. But instead, they see you growing, evolving, glowing in ways they didn't know you were capable of. You're not bitter. You're not resentful. You're not chasing them, or proving anything, or performing your worth. You simply moved on. And that is the moment that breaks them. Not your silence, but your peace. Not your absence, but your evolution. Not the end, but the fact that you didn't need them to become someone stronger. They start replaying everything. The conversations they dismissed, the effort they didn't match, the times you needed reassurance, and they shrugged it off. The moments they made you feel unseen without even noticing. And suddenly, every memory carries weight. Every failed moment feels heavier. Every careless word hits harder. Every ignored need turns into a regret they can't rewind. This is when it dawns on them. They didn't just lose you, they lost the version of you that loved them with a purity they may never experience again. And that version is gone, not because it died, but because it evolved into someone who finally understands their own worth. They begin to realize your love was a privilege they assumed was guaranteed, a privilege they treated like an entitlement, a privilege they only understand after it's taken away. And now, they can't find anyone who matches your sincerity, your presence, your emotional depth, not because others aren't good enough, but because the connection they had with you wasn't something they built with effort. It was something their soul recognized. Some people fit into your life logically. You fit into theirs spiritually. And that is why the loss feels cosmic. Sooner or later, they come to a painful truth. The heart they broke was the one heart that would have protected theirs. The heart they hurt was the one heart that would have warmed theirs. The heart they dismissed was the one heart that understood them when they didn't understand themselves. That's the moment the ego finally collapses. That's the moment the truth finally sinks in. That's the moment they finally whisper to themselves, I messed up. I pushed away the one person who saw me and stayed. And from that moment on, every connection they form feels incomplete, not because others lack value, but because you brought out a version of them they can't recreate. They broke the wrong heart, and now they live with the knowing that the right one is gone. There comes a point in every person's life where they have to face themselves, not the version they show the world, not the version they pretend to be, not the version their ego protects, but the version that lives underneath the armor, the part of them that remembers everything they tried to forget. And for them, that moment arrives quietly. It doesn't knock. It doesn't warn. It doesn't announce itself. It just appears in the middle of an ordinary day as a heaviness in their chest they can't explain, a familiar sadness they can't push away, a memory of you that hits harder than it ever did before. Because this is the point where regret transforms from a thought into a feeling, where maybe I should have treated them better, becomes, God, what did I do? And suddenly, everything they suppressed comes rushing back. Your patience, your kindness, your softness, your effort, your presence, the way you love them, even when they didn't deserve it. All of it comes back in one overwhelming wave. They start replaying scenes they never paid attention to when you were still around, how you listened when they rambled about their day, how you held space for emotions they never processed, how you showed up even when you were exhausted, how you tried to understand them when they couldn't even understand themselves. At the time, they didn't realize those moments mattered. At the time, they didn't notice what you were giving. At the time, they thought love was something that would stay, no matter how carelessly they treated it. But now, with you goner, those memories feel like ghosts that won't leave them alone. They don't haunt them with fear, they haunt them with truth. Truth about how much you offered, truth about how little they reciprocated, truth about how deeply you once cared, and truth about how deeply they now miss what they took for granted. People think heartbreak only happens to the person who was left hurting, but the real heartbreak begins in the one who realizes too late what they ruined. That is the heartbreak they're experiencing now. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's not something they talk about with others. It's the quiet kind, the kind that seeps into their mind when they're alone, the kind that lingers in the silence before sleep, the kind that tightens their chest when they remember your smile, the kind that makes them wish they could go back and undo everything, but they can't. And that's what breaks them, because now they're beginning to understand something they never understood before. You were their safe place, not because you fixed them, not because you coddled them, not because you made their problems disappear, but because you saw them in a way no one else did. You saw beyond their humor, beyond their walls, beyond their inconsistencies, beyond their fears, beyond the mess they tried to hide. You saw the human behind the armor, and you loved both. That kind of connection doesn't happen often. It doesn't happen twice. It doesn't happen on command. And now, they're realizing just how rare that kind of love was. This is where their self-reflection begins. Not because they want to grow, not because they were ready to change, not because they suddenly reached maturity, but because losing you forced them into a version of themselves they can't outrun anymore. A version that has to admit they weren't good to you. A version that has to acknowledge their own emotional immaturity. A version that finally understands that pushing you away didn't protect them. It destroyed something precious. They start noticing patterns they never acknowledged. How they avoid closeness because closeness scares them. How they sabotage love because it feels too vulnerable. How they ruin good things before good things can ruin them. How they choose ego when what they really want is connection. They start to see how their behaviors weren't just mistakes. They were wounds. Wounds they carried into your life. Wounds they projected onto you. Wounds you try to help them heal. And instead of facing those wounds, they pushed away the only person who actually cared enough to see them. That is what aches the most, not the loss, the realization. As they reflect, something else begins to form, a quiet envy towards the next person who gets to meet you, not out of hatred, not out of bitterness, not out of entitlement, but out of regret, because now they understand that someone else will experience the version of you they didn't protect. Someone else will appreciate the small details they overlooked. Someone else will value the effort they dismissed. Someone else will hold the heart they broke. And that thought unravels them because they always assumed you'd be theirs if they ever wanted you again. They never imagined you'd grow, heal, move forward, find someone who doesn't fumble your love like they did. Now they realize they didn't just lose you, they lost the future with you. The laughs, the growth, the softness, the evolution, the life you could have built together. It's gone, not because you walked away, but because they pushed you one too many times. This is where their self-blame begins. Not the dramatic kind, not the attention-seeking kind, but the inward kind, the kind that shakes a person from the inside out. They start asking themselves questions that cut deeply. What if I had tried harder? What if I had listened? What if I had communicated? What if I had chosen love instead of fear? What if I hadn't pushed them away? What if they were the one I was meant to keep? And the worst question of all, what if I never meet another person like them? That question doesn't disappear. It lingers. It circles. It becomes a knot in their throat every time they remember you. Because deep down, they know the truth. You were different. Your love was different. Your presence was different. Your soul was different. And they will feel the loss of that difference for a very long time. But here's the part they never saw coming. They are not just grieving you. They're grieving the version of themselves they never got to become because they destroyed the one relationship that could have helped them grow. They're grieving the emotional maturity they almost reached with you. They're grieving the vulnerability they almost learned. They're grieving the softness they almost embraced. They're grieving the love they almost deserved. They're grieving the person they could have been. And that hurts more than losing you because it means they didn't just break your heart. They broke the potential of their own. And as all this sinks in, something else begins forming inside them. The desire to go back. Not because they suddenly became healed. Not because they're magically mature. Not because they've changed overnight. But because now, they finally see the truth they were too blind to see before. You weren't a temporary chapter. You weren't a passing moment. You weren't someone they can forget. You were the turning point they weren't ready for. And losing you was the consequence they can't undo. This is the moment they finally understand. They didn't break a heart. They broke the right one. And that is a realization they will carry for the rest of their life. There comes a point when regret turns into action. Not the loud kind, not the dramatic kind, not the show up at your door and make grand gestures kind. It's quieter, more hesitant, more human. It begins with small impulses they don't know how to control. They start typing messages. They don't send. They look at your profile without interacting. They rehearse conversations they're too afraid to initiate because now They're living in the aftermath of their own decisions. And for the first time, they're feeling the weight of what it really means to break someone like you. They want to reach out, but they freeze. Not because they don't want you, not because they don't miss you, not because they've moved on, but because they know the person they were when they hurt you is not the person who deserves you now. They don't trust themselves anymore. They don't trust that they won't repeat the past. They don't trust that they won't fall back into fear. They don't trust that they've grown enough to stand beside you without hurting you again. So instead of coming forward, they hold back, not out of strength, but out of shame. They think about apologizing, but the words feel too small for the damage they caused. They think about explaining, but they know explanations won't erase what you felt. They think about asking for another chance, but they know they haven't earned one. So they stay silent in the only way they know how, by hoping their absence speaks the remorse their tongue can't articulate. But even that silence isn't peaceful. It's heavy. It's aching. It's filled with the tension of everything they wish they could undo. And while they sit with their guilt, something else is happening. They're watching you grow. They see the light returning to you. They see you finding your strength again. They see you moving in a direction that no longer circles back to them. You're healing. You're blooming. You're stepping into your worth. And that triggers a different kind of pain in them. The pain of realizing that your healing is taking you somewhere they can't follow. They used to think you would always be there, that they had time, that love would wait until they were ready. They never expected that you would become the version of yourself they always needed, right after they lost you. This is when their internal conflict begins. Part of them wants to come back and try again, but another part knows you deserve more than their uncertainty. Part of them wants to fight for you, but another part fears they're still the same person who caused the pain. Part of them wants to say, I'm sorry. I understand now. I should have valued you. But another part whispers, they'll never believe you. You broke too much. So they stay stuck in a quiet limbo, wanting you, needing you, missing you, but feeling unworthy of you. This is the moment most people never talk about. The moment where the one who hurt you finally becomes the one who fears losing you the most. And while they're struggling with their guilt and longing, something else unfolds slowly. Inside their mind, they start to realize just how much of their behavior was rooted in fear. Not fear of you, not fear of love, but fear of being seen. Because you saw them in a way that stripped away the persona they used to hide behind. You saw their wounds, their insecurities, their defensive patterns, their avoidance, their emotional immaturity. You saw all the parts they didn't want anyone to notice, especially themselves. Being loved by you forced them to confront the very things they've spent years avoiding. And the truth is, they weren't ready. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know how to be loved without feeling exposed. So instead of letting you in, they pushed you away. And now they're living with the aftermath of pushing away the one person who loved them genuinely. But here's the shift. Now that they understand what they lost, they also understand they cannot stay the same. The pain of losing you becomes the catalyst for a transformation they should have begun long ago. For some, this becomes the moment they finally seek healing. They start therapy. They confront their patterns. They build emotional awareness. They sit with their discomfort instead of running from it. They look in the mirror and admit, I damaged something real, and I don't want to be that version of myself anymore. For others, The change is slower, more internal, more painful. They begin choosing better, behaving better, speaking better, treating others with care, because they now understand what it feels like to hurt someone they loved. You became the lesson that reshaped them, not because you intended to, not because you wanted to be, not because you deserved that burden, but because your presence held up a mirror they couldn't ignore. And here's the part you rarely hear. Even if they change, even if they grow, even if they evolve into someone you once needed, it doesn't guarantee they get to come back. You were not meant to be their life lesson. You were not meant to be their emotional wake-up call. You were not meant to bleed so they could learn how to stop hurting people. You were meant to love and be loved with the same intensity you give, not rescued, not tolerated, not taken for granted, loved. And while they may finally understand what they broke, that understanding doesn't entitle them to what they lost. That is the part that breaks them the most, because now they realize they didn't just lose you, they lost a version of themselves they'll never get back, because that version only existed when you were still in their life. They lost the smile you gave them. They lost the peace you brought. They lost the emotional safety they never appreciated. They lost the chance to love you right. They lost the opportunity to build a future with the one person who actually saw them. They lost the chapter they were supposed to treasure. And that loss will echo through their life far longer than your heartbreak ever did. Because heartbreak heals, but regret stays. This is the moment they finally understand the truth that terrifies them. They didn't break someone replaceable. They didn't break someone temporary. They didn't break someone forgettable. They broke the heart that would have given them everything they were searching for. They broke the heart that believed in them, the heart that saw their potential, that carried them, even when they were too heavy. They broke the right heart, the one that actually mattered. And nothing they do from this point forward will ever change that truth.